This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. I think the Browns are the most underrated team in the NFL. It's surprising that a team that went 11-5 last year could be in this position, but the more I read, the more I talk to people, the more I hear what people's opinions are and why they have these opinions of the Cleveland Browns. I think that they fall into the category, if not dominate the category, of most underrated team in the NFL. Now, I have multiple reasons why I think this, and I'll respond to the common arguments that I heard about why people think the Browns aren't going to be good this year. And I want to make one thing clear. This is just how I feel about the team. If I wasn't a Browns fan and just a football fan, and I was looking at these things for a team, I would be very bullish on their ability to be above expectation, or at least above what people are expecting of them. So yeah, this is the Browns that I'm talking about. Now, obviously, I'm a Browns fan, but I get nothing from lying about the Browns, right? I'm lying about how I feel about them. I genuinely feel this way. This is why I feel this way. And I feel like if you felt this way about any team, you would think that they're underrated if people are projecting them to go under 500. Especially after a 11-win season. So let's get into it. Why do I think that this is the most underrated team in the NFL? One, this team is insanely talented. I think that has gotten lost in all of the Deshaun Watson discourse. And I think, no surprise here, the main reason why the Browns are in this position where people are trying to go out their way to not realize what they're doing well. I mean, we've seen this with how contracts have been covered with this team, where people have the most doom and gloom approach. Remember how people were making videos nationally about how the Browns would have to cut Nick Chubb because of Deshaun Watson's contract, and how it would be impossible for them to bring back anybody, let alone add guys. But this offseason, they brought back everybody and then added Jerry Jeudy, despite the fact that the national people told you that that was impossible, right? People's feelings about Deshaun Watson have gotten in the way of seeing what this team is actually doing. When you see people praise Philadelphia for doing the same thing that the Cleveland Browns are doing, this is kind of the effect that happens to them, because when the Browns do the same thing Philadelphia is doing, we get criticized for it, right? So anyways, why are the Browns the most underrated team in the NFL? They're a very talented team. They were able to bring back pretty much all of their key starters from a team that was able to not just go 11-6, but go 11-6 with a significant portion of the roster, a quarter of the roster a quarter of the salary cap on injured reserve by the end of the season. They're returning that entire roster. Not only are they returning that roster, this is not an old roster, right? This is a roster that most of the starters are within 25 and 28. It's pretty good. So not only are you returning a ton of talented players, you're returning a ton of talented players in their prime, right? You're talking about guys who are either in their early 30s to mid to late 20s that you're relying on, which is exactly the target area of players that you want to rely on. You know that this team has a great locker room dynamic. Now, that's not something that's guaranteed to carry over year to year, but they had a great locker room dynamic last year. They're returning the same key veterans and key spots that they had last year. That should be something that's super important. So not only is this team talented, this is also a veteran team, which is an angle I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. Because I think when people think of the Cleveland Browns, they remember the Browns accumulating all those picks, and they feel like all of the Browns' best players are still on their rookie deals. But that's not the case. Most of the Browns' best players are on their second or third contract with the franchise, which means that this is not a young team anymore, right? The Texans are a super young team, similar to what the Browns were in 2018 and 2019 when they traded for Odell Beckham. They have young leaders leadership. They have guys who have really only been with the franchise for 1 or 2 years leading that operation. The Cleveland Browns have a completely different thing going on, where not only do they have older players that are in their prime, not only do they have veteran players who have been through it, not only do they have battle-tested veteran players, these players have been battle-tested as Cleveland Browns. They've been in this organization, in this building for at least 4 years with Kevin Stefanski, some of them longer than that when you're talking about Nick Chubb, Myles Garrett, David Njoku. Like when you're really talking about the core of this team, you're talking about guys who have been here 5, 6 years, have been on this team, knows how the season goes in this city, knows how the weather goes in the city, knows how AFC North football goes during the course of the year. And they're just a veteran unit. They're a very talented veteran unit that has a ton of continuity. Now, we're familiar with this concept in college football, right? Where if a team has a ton of talent that are returning and they have continuity, that team's always going to be one of the best teams in the country. We know this as a safe projection or a safe way of making projections for college football teams, right? Oh, Ohio State has a ton of returning juniors, a ton of returning seniors. They're going to be able to return this key player, that guy. They got this quarterback coming back. Oh, that's going to be a good team. We understand that concept when it comes to college football. In the NFL, we understand that concept, but we tend to get wrapped up in the draft. We tend to get wrapped up in free agency, that continuity and having a veteran team flies under the radar in the summer, right? It's cool to bring in free agents. It's cool to bring in draft picks and play them right away at this point of the year. But the teams that are winning in January, the teams that are winning in February are not the teams that are playing a bunch of dudes that they signed in March and that they drafted in April. It's just facts, right? Like that's the teams we are talking about at the end of the year being serious contenders. They're never, and I'm going to say this again just so it's clear, they're never the teams that are drafting dudes to start in April and signing dudes to start in March. They're never those teams. That's for a reason, because continuity, it matters. Bringing back guys and having that continuity with the talent attached to it on a roster, that matters. That has flown under the radar. The Browns have not only talent, they have veteran talent, and that veteran talent is in the peak part of their career. Here's another thing, and look, I'll get more into this. But last year, the Cleveland Browns proved one thing, is that this version of this roster can play through having a bad quarterback year. Say what you want about any of the quarterbacks that the Cleveland Browns have had. There's been hot takes about all of them. People have said that Joe Flacco was better than Deshaun Watson, a take that I heavily disagree with when you look at the context of how everything went down. But the truth is that the Browns last year passed for 3,693 yards, threw for 24 touchdowns, and threw 23 interceptions. The 23 interceptions were the most in the NFL. If you can survive that kind of quarterback play, you have the type of team that can win. If you get a team that, like, if Deshaun Watson just comes in here, puts up those same stats, but throws 10 less interceptions, you're talking about the 1 seed in the NFL. That's how bad the quarterback play, how inconsistent the quarterback play was last year. And that's how much it didn't matter. Joe Flacco can throw a bunch of interceptions because the defense can get a ton of stops. Deshaun Watson could miss a bunch of games because the defense can carry PJ Walker and DTR to multiple victories. The quarterback position just didn't matter as much when it came to wins and losses last year because the defense was so dominant. You were able to get away with a lot at the quarterback position, which means that when it comes to the quarterback position, you have a wide berth of outcomes that you can live with and still get a ton of wins out of, which again, when it comes to projecting a team, it's very important because the quarterback position for the rest of the teams, like there's like 6 teams that got great quarterbacks. For everybody else that's trying to figure it out, that's the biggest thing that determines whether your season is going to be good or not, is what you get out the quarterback position. So the more and more your season relies less and less on the quarterback, the better your chances are to be a good team that year. I'm gonna get more into that. I promise y'all want to get more into that. I'll get more into that, but I have a couple other points to make. The Browns still have a better chance than most teams that don't have elite quarterback play to get elite quarterback play. Deshaun Watson is not 35 years old like Russell Wilson. The Browns aren't waiting for somebody who is aged out of his prime to play at a high level. They're waiting for somebody who is in his prime when it comes to his age to bounce back and play at a high level. That has a higher chance of happening, especially when you bring in an offense that's going to be shaped around him for the first time since he's been here. You're bringing in somebody like Ken Dorsey, who has an impeccable track record with quarterbacks in general. And you add weapons like Jerry Jeudy on top of Amari Cooper with a burgeoning star in David Njoku and possibly bringing back Nick Chubb. You see where things can go. If you look at a lot of teams, the Browns have a really good chance to get really good quarterback play out of Deshaun Watson, more so than a lot of teams are hoping to get out of their rookies, out of their free agent signings, out of all of them. So the Browns have that as well. Even if you don't think that they have it currently at quarterback, it is more possible that Deshaun Watson bounce backs and plays closer to his 2019, 2020 form than most of these quarterbacks have a chance to even get close to where Deshaun Watson was in 2019 and 2020. So those are my reasons, right? The Browns have a veteran team, a very talented veteran team, a team that is getting there in its prime. They have a ton of returning starters, a ton of continuity on both sides of the ball, a quarterback who's still in the age range to produce high-level play, who's done it before when he was younger, and you have a elite coach who's won 2 Coach of the Years. You have a defensive coordinator who's regarded as one of the best in the NFL. You have an offensive coordinator. You have good coaches, a really good GM, a really good roster, a ton of continuity. You put that in a bowl, that seems like a good team to me. I know people are trying to sell you that this is a disaster. That's ridiculous. Look at what's on the table. Look at the ingredients that you just put into that bowl. Now, there's 2 main arguments that I get from people who have more of a pessimistic feeling about the Cleveland Browns this year. Strength of schedule and what about Deshaun Watson, right? Like that's basically the 2 brands of argument you're going to get in the comment section. It's going to be dudes arguing about strength of schedule or dudes arguing about Deshaun Watson. It's usually how this thing goes, right? I've been doing this long enough. I think people use strength of schedule like magic beans in an argument. If your take doesn't make sense, if you're saying a team's not going to be good, strength of schedule, it's going to be tougher for them. They're not going to be able to replicate it. Strength of schedule. It's always there to kind of paper a bad argument that can't be defended by actual football knowledge. Like just anything about what's going on with the team, what the numbers are, who they're bringing back. Like, no, you can't come up with any of that. Strength of schedule. That's your trap card, is strength of schedule in an argument. To me, strength of schedule is magic beans. And much like magic beans, it's bullshit. Arguments about strength of schedule are almost always and comedically so bullshit, because we kind of all understand that strength of schedule arguments in the spring and summer before a season starts are inherently silly, but they're not deemed as silly enough to be illegitimate arguments. But they are not legitimate arguments. Like, strength of schedule arguments are not legitimate. The reason strength of schedule arguments are not legitimate to me is that there is no way to predict reliably what a team's strength of schedule is going to be like. You can look at that list of teams. You could tell me it's going to be tougher than it was last year, but there's no way to reliably predict it. Last year, the Browns were slated to have the 26th weakest strength of schedule. So they were going to have an easy schedule, bottom of the league schedule. It's going to be super easy, right? They're based on the win percentages of the teams in 2022. 2023 is supposed to be an easy ride for the Cleveland Browns. based on those same numbers at the end of 2023, the Browns actually had the 4th hardest schedule in football. We were projected to have the 26th hardest schedule in football. We ended with the 4th. Now, anybody who studies numbers knows that any projection that's that wildly off and consistently wildly off, like you could just look at what a strength of schedule projects to be versus what it actually is for any team, and there's going to be wild jumps in there, which tells you that there's no way to reliably predict it. If somebody is selling you an algorithm that's telling you what the strength of schedule is going to be, that algorithm is just bullshit. It's not real. There's no way to predict it. The reason there's no way to predict strength of schedule is because there's no algorithm, no metric that can account for injuries, that can account for in-season coaching changes, whether it be positional, whether it be coordinators, whether it be head coaches. There's also just responsibility changes within coaching staffs that affect teams that we don't really hear about on our side that happen every year, almost on a weekly basis, right? But that happens. It can't account for players going through personal struggle. It can't account for injuries and when those injuries are going to happen. And if that injury to that player is going to happen the week that you play that player, it's not going to account for a random player going on a Linsanity streak. It's also not going to account for a great player having a terrible run of games. It cannot account for weather. It can't account for a game being moved because of weather. It can't account for who's coming off a bye week, who's coming off a mini bye week, who has a big game ahead of them, who's going to be overlooking an opponent, who's going to be underlooking an opponent. It cannot predict these things. Who's playing through injury? There's no algorithm that can project that when it comes to strength of schedule. Is a key player not getting sleep enough before the night of a big game, or maybe that player was out, or maybe that player had an argument? Like what? There's so many variables that affect the NFL game that it's silly to think that we could project it with strength of schedule in April. It's not even something we can project week to week when the season's going on. We might think the Browns have a tough schedule 5 weeks into the season, but then you get to week 12 and we're like, oh no, the schedule's lightened up. Randomly, like the Jaguars just stink now. This is what I mean. It's impossible to predict. I can't even predict strength of schedule in the season 2 weeks ahead of time. What makes anybody think that you could project strength of schedule now before the season even starts? It's silly. It's the worst argument that anybody could put up. It's a illegitimate argument to me. Any argument based on strength of schedule might as well be based in magic beans, foo-foo, and woo-woo. Quarterback play. People have made the big point. The Browns won't be good if Deshaun Watson does not play great. One, I think Deshaun Watson's struggles have been overblown. Has he struggled a little bit? Sure. Has he played to the level that he was in 2019, 2020? Absolutely not. Has he played like a $230 million quarterback? No. Has he been an outright disaster on the football field? No. Like, I don't get why people talk about it like this. Like last year, for the most part, Deshaun Watson was above average. He wasn't excellent. He wasn't blowing us away. He wasn't, one of the best 5 quarterbacks in the NFL, but he was above average, right? He was above average in the Arizona game. He was above average in the Cincinnati game. He was above average in the Tennessee game. He was above average in the Baltimore game. It's 4 games out of 5 he was above average in. We're talking about him as if he was like objectively awful, like the Browns could not win games with him at quarterback. That's not true. The Browns have won games with him at quarterback. They've actually won 7 games out of 7? They're 7-3 or 7-4 with him as a starting quarterback, and that's if you don't include the Indianapolis game. So that narrative just doesn't fly with me. And the whole take that, hey, well, if Deshaun Watson doesn't play up to a $230 million quarterback, the Browns are going to fail. Like that whole take that if he doesn't play to that level, the Browns are going to fail is based in so many assumptions, and those assumptions are just flat wrong, right? The reason the money matters when you make that take is you're assuming that the Browns aren't going to be able to bring back key players, or that the Browns aren't going to be able to bring support around Deshaun Watson. That is just not true. Deshaun Watson doesn't even have to play like a $230 million quarterback for the Browns to win 12 games and get the 1 seed this year, because he has a very talented team that has shown that they can carry the quarterback position. They have a very talented wide receiving core and tight end that have proven that they can carry the quarterback position to where it needs to go to win games against elite competition. The Browns last year won 8 of their 11 games against teams over 500, and they did it while throwing the most interceptions in the NFL. This is a team that can get through some stuff if that were the case, and that's not even the case. When Deshaun Watson was out there with the Cleveland Browns, the Browns had a point differential that was similar to the Kansas City Chiefs at plus 63. They were their best version of the team with Deshaun Watson. They got their most blowout victories with Deshaun Watson at quarterback. Part of the reason the stats for Deshaun Watson don't look ridiculous is because in 2 of the games that he played in out of 4, he had to be benched in the 4th quarter because the Browns were just dominating those teams that badly. The Deshaun Watson struggles are overblown. And the level of play that people are projecting that Deshaun Watson needs to get to in order for the Browns to be good is just much higher than what is necessary. Is it possible that Deshaun Watson can get to that level? Sure. And if the Browns do get to that level, they'll be favorites to win the Super Bowl. But the fact is that he doesn't even have to get to that level. He could throw for 4,000 yards, 27 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. The Browns will probably be the 1 seed if he does that. That's not $230 million quarterback level, but that's pretty damn good. And if he does pretty damn good, the Browns will be the 1 seed. If he does all right, they're probably going to be one of the higher seeds in the playoffs. The whole narrative about Deshaun Watson and making this Browns success about Deshaun Watson is going to be something that's fascinating to watch, because if this Browns team is as good as I think they are, it's going to change in real time to, oh, the Browns need Deshaun Watson to play like a $230 million quarterback, to Deshaun Watson somehow at $230 million in the salary cap number that y'all told me would destroy the team is being carried by the rest of the roster. It's going to be interesting to watch. But either way you chop it, the Browns are pretty underrated. That's my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.